Alright guys, welcome back. We're going to start kicking off this series with something called short stories. I was told that I should check this out first before going into reincarnation because it delves into a little bit more about the characters and what was going on prior to what comes next in reincarnation. So that's what I'm about to do. And most importantly guys, I want to thank you all for the love and support you all continue to show this series. Thank you so very much guys. Like, you guys have been with me throughout the longest haul of this game, and I am incredibly thankful. So we're going to continue onwards and see what this is about. So without further ado, let's get to it. The vast majority of happenings in this world are not recorded in stories, either too trifling or adding no meaning to our lives. These facts of life are coldly cast aside with only the tiniest sliver deemed worthy enough. Each day we relentlessly discard unnecessary fragments of our lives, fragments forever lost to the ether. Tales afforded not their moment in the limelight, left to waste away in obscurity. A slow-killing poison. Alright, so these are the stories I guess I can choose from. We have a total of 1, 2, 10, and then next page, right? Oh, okay. Alright, well, we're gonna start with a slow killing poison then. The maid spoke little of what happened after the white-haired girl's disappearance in the era of roses, for she believed the rest of the tale insignificant, of no value to share with her listener, the white-haired girl herself. Thus, her role as a storyteller ended with the girl's departure from the stage. And while the other character stories continued on, they were cut from the script, afforded not their moment in the limelight, left to waste away in obscurity. A slow-killing poison. Arthur Baldwin was vexed. Shortly before they were to be married, his engagement with Nellie Rhodes, eldest daughter of the Rhodes family, had been broken off. He understood well enough why it had happened, and had it been his decision, he likely would have made the same one. Okay, so it's going back to the point where Nellie was supposed to be engaged to this guy, Arthur Baldwin, who was also pretty much a jerk. It's been a while since we went back to that storyline, but I remember him. He wasn't a good dude. So Arthur's dissatisfaction lay not with the dissolution in itself, nor did he bear any fault in it. His bride-to-be had simply been gripped by madness. I hear she attacked an Abigail. Oh, I was told she took one of her eyes out. Even worse, she killed her. Those are but rumors, my dears. The truth is so much more dreadful. I used to work at the Rhodes Manor, you see, and the young lady, Initially, Arthur was skeptical of what people were saying. He assumed the tales were being exaggerated as they spread. But when the head of the Rhodes family came personally to deliver reparations and formally nullify the engagement, he gave Arthur a rough overview of what had happened. It was apparently true that Nellie had assaulted an Abigail, and it was true that she spent most of her time in her room now, looking pale and sickly and drained of her spirits. And then, when he said outright, a demon possessed her, Arthur had little choice but to believe something wasn't right. And to top it all off, Nellie's older brother Mel ran off to become a priest, presumably to get away from everything. Nellie's father implored Arthur to remain discreet about her situation, not that he had any intention of going around and spreading personal details about her life. However, rumors have a nasty way of slipping through the tiniest of cracks, sneaking about through the dark like a seasoned cat burglar. What nobles like to refer to as social gatherings were in practice more like gossip gatherings. And in short order, the Rhodes family eldest daughter was the talk of high society. Incidentally, the painter whose downfall eventually culminated into this tragedy was also strangled by the noble grapevine, though Arthur had no way of knowing as much. Perhaps the painter curse extended beyond the girl's hair color, and the Rhodes family was destined to be brought to ruin by the gossip of their fellow aristocrats. One evening, Arthur decided he would sneak into the Rhodes Manor. He had requested visitation with Nellie on numerous occasions, but been turned away every time. She's in no condition for company, was what they kept telling him, which left him no choice but to see her uninvited. The aroma of the roses seemed more overpowering at night than during the day, and he wasn't sure whether it was just his imagination. The nagging irritation it caused in him was, however, not only in his mind. Arthur instructed his coachman to wait on the street a little ways out and made the rest of the way to the manor on foot, entering through the garden. As he waded through the sea of roses, he clenched his teeth. Arthur preferred restraint when it came to both gardening and girls. What am I doing with my life? How'd I end up here sneaking about trying to find that obnoxious little girl's room? Arthur had a few pleasant memories of this rose garden. The Rhodes and Baldwins had a long history, so as a child, he would often find himself left here to play while the adults did business. It was him, Nellie, who could never seem to stop hanging off her brother, and Mel, the textbook definition of a well-behaved aristocrat boy. Not once had he managed to step into the siblings' private world. There was only room for the two of them, leaving Arthur stuck out here all by himself. The best he could manage was a little teasing now and then. For example, saying her hair looked like the color of fallen leaves. I never asked for this engagement anyway. Who would even want to marry a girl who thinks herself some kind of princess? Not me, that's for sure. But still. He had known her practically his whole life. Of course he was going to be curious when people were saying she had gone mad or been possessed by a demon. He was just curious, he told himself as he drew nearer to Nellie's window. The curtains appeared to be drawn. He couldn't see anything inside, so he crouched down to pick up a few pebbles to toss over the veranda. A few soft taps rang out in the night before the curtain finally shifted. A few moments later, a young girl stumbled out into the moonlight. Despite already knowing the answer, his first thought was, "Who is that?" He wanted to smack himself, but at the same time, it was hard to deny the discrepancies between the girl standing there and the girl of his memories. The moonlight seemed to give her flaxen hair a ghostly bluish tint. It fluttered in a passing breeze, and Arthur felt something about her he never had before. She's so pretty. Whoa, slow down. What's wrong with you? Pretty? That self-centered, spoiled little brat? There wasn't a trace of the rambunctious Nellie he knew to be found. She stood there by the veranda's railing, gazing vaguely off into space like a pensive spirit. It wasn't at all what Arthur had expected to see when he came calling. He assumed she would be nothing but skin and bones, haggard and unsightly. Now, Lady Nellie, do you not think it rude to not at least greet me? We were engaged, as you might recall. Her eyes still in focus, Nellie turned her gaze down toward where Arthur stood. It was a reaction, but still he felt as though she had snubbed him, which did little to alleviate the irritation building up since he had arrived. Look, it's like a scene right out of your beloved Romeo and Juliet. Not that I'm here enthusiastically, of course. Mumbling complaints to himself, Arthur climbed a nearby tree, leaping from a branch onto the veranda. And there she was, within arm's reach, but as distant as ever. Still, he could see nothing in her eyes. Hello? Say something already, would you, Nellie? Perhaps she really had lost her mind, just not in the way he had been led to believe. Arthur spent a few moments pondering how to proceed. He didn't consider himself a model gentleman like Mel, not even slightly, but he wasn't so crass as to laugh it off either. You certainly are quiet tonight, aren't you? I'm not sure how I'm supposed to act when you're like a completely different person. Every time you open your mouth, I want to sew it shut. You're always complaining. Nothing's ever good enough for you. But right now, I just want you to say something. Anything. How am I supposed to know what's going through your head if you don't tell me? Or is there just nothing at all? Nellie's gaze glided past Arthur into the rose garden behind him. Nellie, are you listening to me? He tried again and again to get her attention, calling her name, waving his hand in front of her face, gently tugging on her hair. But all his attempts were fruitless. She simply stood there, lifeless, a well-crafted doll. He wasn't sure exactly how to describe how he felt, slightly unsettled to start. A bit of pity to go with it, and a great deal of something yanking at his insides. Arthur had a few pleasant memories with the Rhodes. That didn't mean he wanted to erase his past with them entirely, though. But looking at her, this empty shell, he felt almost as though those days were disappearing with her. How irritating. He knew the word wasn't right, but he went with it anyway, heaving a sigh after letting it linger in the air for a moment. It's always been like this. I'm no more than a buzzing insect to you. I can't stand this dreadful rose garden. It was exhausting having to come here again and again just because our families are close. I would try to say something and you'd go running off into your darling brother's arms. Dearest Mel this, dearest Mel that. Is that all you know how to say? And he would just give you a half-hearted smile and pretend to be sorry for not paying attention to you. Arthur looked out over the garden as well. He was more talking to himself than he was to Nellie. I'm sure you don't remember, but one time I even brought you flowers. What were they, some kind of anemone, I think? But you wouldn't take them. You said the roses here were prettier, so you didn't need my flowers. What a miserable day that was. But standing beside this silent specter, melancholy overwhelmed any anger or frustration he might have otherwise felt. Perhaps it was because nothing he said managed to elicit any reaction out of her. Or perhaps because he wished he had come out and said this all sooner. Unless expressed feelings merely fester. I don't care one bit about you, and I mean that. It's only ever been about doing what's best for my family. Of course, Nellie was a perfect example of why you couldn't let everything out either. The gossip spoke not only of her attacking Abigail, but of her destroying her relationship with her brother. And that was likely what had done the most damage. Knowing what he knew of Nellie in her younger days, Arthur had little trouble believing what the rumors said, that her affection for Mel went far beyond simple familial love. It was for my family, but that doesn't mean I wasn't going to try to get along with you. You probably don't believe me since I certainly never acted like it, but I genuinely did want us to be on good terms. It's just, you had to be the one who changed first. You were always treating me like I was worthless, like I meant nothing to you. Not like any of that would have even left an impression in your one-track mind, of course. But that's why I wanted you to take the first step. I'm not some wise old monk who can just turn my frustration off on command. Arthur let out another sigh. Do you think anything would have gone differently if I could have been more grown up? A gust of wind blew through, sending up a flurry of rose petals, carrying them up past the two of them and through the velvet curtains into Nellie's bedchamber. A faint smile crossed her lips. Arthur could only guess at what was going through her mind, what was reflected in her eyes. In her room, he could see several pairs of small children's shoes, a doll with its hair all neatly made up, a polished sheet of music drawn up for her by a respected composer years earlier, and toys carved from wood. It was like he was looking through the window into the past. That was all he needed to know. He could have treated her like the princess she thought she was, and she would have gone down the same path. Nellie's eyes were on one person only. Arthur wasn't even a shadow on her peripheral. Your brother's still smiling for you in there, isn't he? And that was all she needed. After that night, Arthur stayed away from the roads and never mentioned the siblings again. It was the best thing to do, he thought. He had his own life to worry about. But fate wouldn't allow him to avoid hearing about the family from time to time. About 4 years later, Nellie, who had apparently fallen ill, passed away at the young age of 18. The Rhodes held a small funeral service, which Mel did not attend. Arthur couldn't even begin to imagine what he, her brother, had felt about it. But another 3 years later, Mel followed behind her. At the age of 24, he threw himself off the top of a church tower. Whoa. See, I never knew how these characters passed on in these stories because they kind of went over it, you know? Like, we just ended up skipping to the next character on. We assumed they didn't end on a good note, though, with each of them. So it's kind of like, it's nice to have some clarity now. According to those near him, he had been acting unusual in the months leading up to his death, claiming he could hear a woman's voice talking to him. If he had taken his life out of grief, 3 years seemed like too long of a gap. Perhaps it had built up over time, and that was how long it took to reach the boiling point, but that's not how it felt to Arthur. It felt like Mel had been guided there by a higher power, or maybe pushed. And there was one other strange detail. He had died at exactly the strike of noon, as the bell rang its 12th toll. Oh, okay. Again, the pattern. See, that's interesting. I like that. Oh, that really was short. I like how the stories interweave themselves, like, at the end. I like how these short stories interweave themselves into the main story somehow, is what I'm trying to say, because we never got that. Alright, we can do with the second story, and then we'll move on. We're going to go in from left to right, left to right. Up, 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 up. Pain Beyond Ending 4. A Moment of Hesitation. How can you be sure that even now, I still love you? Can you deny the possibility that I no longer yearn for you, but the white haired girl? Can you deny the possibility that my love for you has transformed into hate? Farewell, Michelle. In a brief moment of hesitation, Michelle had abandoned Giselle, leading to the worst possible outcome for the both of them. The both of them and one other as well, a young girl. Wait, is this one of those endings that I didn't get where instead of choosing to be with Giselle, he chose to run away from her? Is that the one? Must be, right? The girl, however, remained oblivious to her fate. Are you sure you really wanted to let him go? The girl leaned back in a rocking chair before the fireplace, tracing her bottom lip with her skeletal finger. Sorry, guys. Her face was covered in hideous scars, a fitting look for the witch of the cursed mansion, but it was her devilish smile that left the strongest impact. The maid, who now remembered she was Giselle, was putting kindling on the fire, a task she had done countless times over hundreds of years. But this time, the circumstances were slightly different. Yes, I am sure. Giselle looked up at the witch distraught. Her already unnaturally pale face was almost entirely devoid of color. Just moments earlier, she had banished the man she loved. She had cast Michelle's soul back into the void, sending it off with a wish that he would never find his way back to this mansion. I see, the witch said, still running her fingers across her lip. I don't think I'll ever understand. If you hate someone, you should chain them down and torture them for all eternity. It was the perfect opportunity to trap his soul. I do not hate him, Giselle said, causing the witch's bony finger to come to a sudden halt. The witch raised an eyebrow, perplexed, but it was hidden in the shadow of her hood for no one to see. Oh, is that so, my dear? After everything you said, I simply assumed. I could never come to hate him. I could never want to see him dead or tortured. As she spoke, the look of dejection on Giselle's face deepened. I guess let me tell you ahead of time. I wasn't aware of what I was to expect from these short stories, but also, usually you're used to me acting out the script, but like I don't know if you noticed, but I'm not feeling all that great, so I prefer to just like read standard for now. So if you guys bear with me on that, I really will appreciate that. I don't know if you prefer just me reading instead of me acting it out. I think there are better actors out there doing a better job that probably have uploaded this game and acted out the characters. I don't know. But again, I would love to, act out Giselle's role and everyone else like I used to. But again, not feeling all that great. So standard reading it is for now. So bear with me, guys, and thank you again. However, there seemed to be a hint of relief beneath it, which the witch couldn't comprehend. Oh ho! Then why did you say what you did? The witch extended her skeletal finger toward Giselle. Giselle sighed, saying, I don't think you would understand. Sometimes you kept your distance from someone because you loved them. You sent them back to the mortal realm to live a normal life away from you in undying apparition because you loved them. You never wanted them to set foot in a cursed mansion again because you loved them. The witch would never understand those desires. She would never understand telling someone, I don't love you because you love them. And she would never understand lying to push someone away because you love them. See, that's unfortunate for her because of the life she led. She will never understand that, at least in this version of the ending. You know? The main pathway she starts to understand bit by bit as to why Giselle would do that, or at least I'm of the belief she would. I assume she would. Probably not, the witch said. I'm not particularly interested in understanding either. It doesn't matter what happened in the interim. In the end, nothing's changed, has it, my dear? You are still my darling devoted maid. But enough time, you will once more forget your name. Giselle slowly closed her eyes. The witch was right. In time, the mansion would eat away at her until there was once again nothing left. However, she no longer felt any fear about losing herself again. Giselle had no one to wait for anymore, which meant she was free from having to despair about him never showing up now. She didn't regret her choice either. As she had shown Michelle the event of her own past, she had come to realize that she was no longer that person, that she was merely an unsettling shadow of the woman he had known, and she didn't want to subject him to that. See, this is why I don't like stories that continue on from a branched off ending that isn't canon, because again, this game is all about tragedy. I get that. That's the theme. But it makes me feel bad. Like, Which is why I'm glad we got to the main storyline and we got the ending we did. Because realistically, I would not be happy with this ending. This part of the ending, in fact, the continuation. It's for the best. Yusuf repeated that phrase to herself again and again. A devilish smile rose to the witch's lips as she watched her gaze slowly sink to the cold floor. Oh, what a wonderful world this is, she said. She was in complete control of everything after all. The cursed mansion existed outside reality, an eternal prison where time held no meaning. What once so perceived as a day could be a second or a year for another soul. The witch Morgana awoke from a long rest. She opened her eyes, and there was the fireplace crackling away. Before it knelt a woman with a deathly pale skin feeding the fire with kindling. Morgana had no idea where the maid got the wood. Hello there. Good morning, the witch snorted. Good morning to you as well, my dear, Morgana said. How long has it been? Since when? Since you cast him out. Cast who out? The maid said with her usual smile, tilting her head, which was all Morgana needed to hear to know what had happened. It's been long enough for you to have fully reverted, I see. Whatever do you mean? The maid asked. Oh, is this one of your riddles? When have I ever given a riddle? You're the one who likes to make everything you say sound mysterious, my dear. My. If you say so. Are you trying to agitate me? Of course not. Now, would you like to start your day with a cup of herbal tea? Morgana sighed. It seemed the maid had indeed fully reverted. She'd had this exchange every single time she woke up since the maid's mind had broken. And even though her own sense of time had dulled as well, having to answer the same questions over and over again was still frustrating. She was the one who had broken the maid's mind in the first place. So she also understood she had brought this on herself. I've told you this again and again. I don't need any tea. And what about breakfast? The maid asked. I don't need food either. As I've also told you repeatedly. The maid pursed her lips into a little pout. Any food or tea you prepare is nothing but the product of a deluded spirit's imagination. I would cast myself into the void before touching that, the witch thought, sighing. Then will you be doing your usual rounds of the house? The maid asked. I suppose, the girl said, gazing up at the dark ceiling. Her only real pastime was visiting the three souls trapped here and tormenting them. Sometimes with words, sometimes with visions of the past, and sometimes with her own two hands. Gradually, bit by bit, she chipped away at their souls. As the master of the house, it acted to serve her will, and that influence was especially powerful while it existed outside time, which meant she could do almost anything she pleased. And she had taken full advantage of that ability to torture the souls of the flaxen-haired boy, the beast-like swordsman, and the monstrous lord. She was more than willing to spend the rest of eternity exacting her revenge on the three of them. That said, she felt things were getting a bit repetitive, and with Michelle banished, there was no longer any hope of outside entertainment, which left her the only one with the power to mix things up. It might be time to send them out again. The maid blinked at her, perplexed. But of course she wouldn't understand. She didn't know about the three souls imprisoned here. Are you going to release something from the mansion? The maid asked quizzically. I would never, the witch said, cackling. They've been placed under a powerful curse, a wish of destruction and reconstruction, and I am going to begin that process again. Have them live their third lives. Oh, I can't wait to see what terrible ends they meet this time. Aren't you excited, my dear? Yes, very much so, the maid said, smiling as though she hadn't understood a single word. The witch jumped to her feet, giddy with rancor. Imagining the miserable, bloody futures the three terrible men would surely meet had fixed her mood in an instant. They had to suffer for all eternity. They had to endure a fate worse than death. They had to pay for their sins, over and over and over again. Morgana first went to visit the flaxen-haired boy whose soul was imprisoned in the rose garden. As she approached the double doors, they opened on their own, the rusty hinges letting out pained shrieks. On the other side lay a colorless, withered garden, a sad shadow of its once brilliant, colorful splendor. Of course, the witch felt no heartache over the garden's state of decay. A boy's shadow knelt on the ground, almost entirely encased in the briar patch. It was wispy and barely managed to retain its human form. Arms wrapped around his head, he muttered endlessly to himself. It's not all my fault. I can't take this anymore. Someone, get me out of here. Morgana stuck her chin out, looking down the pathetic creature before her. Her last time here he had been a bit more coherent, but now he seemed to be hardly there at all. The flaxen-haired boy's punishment was to relive the day that started it all over and over again. He had to watch dozens of people die during the harvest festival celebration, including his own sister. And now that he'd finished his second life as well, she'd made him watch his mistakes from that as well. Such as the time he called his sister disgusting and pushed her away. The very same sister he betrayed the lakeside witch for. I never could have known that would happen. I just wanted a normal life. Someone, please, get me out of here. Would you like me to set you free? The witch asked. Only then did the shadow notice her presence, looking up at her with his featureless, empty face. What? The witch's smirk grew wider. I said I'm thinking of releasing you. If the flaxen-haired boy had any strength left to think, he would have realized this was all a trick, not a sudden display of kindness. But all he could see was an opportunity to escape, and he was going to take it. Please, let me go. He didn't even so much as wonder why. The only thing that registered in his feeble mind was the word free. Nothing else mattered as long as he could escape this place. The witch's devilish smirk widened even further. Very well then, I shall deliver your soul to its rightful place. You are very fortunate to have this chance to return to the mortal realm, my dear. Thank you so much for your forgiveness. A contorted smile rose to the flaxen-haired boy's face. He then whisked away into nothing, leaving behind only a small breeze to rustle the witch's robe. It took all her strength to not burst out laughing. Thank you for your forgiveness. That was brilliant. She hadn't said a thing about forgiving him. Farewell, Mel, the witch said, tracing her lips with her bone finger. We'll meet again soon, she said. The witch's parting words this time were not until our souls crossed paths once more in the boundless sphere of fate. Because she hadn't released him from the curse, so his fate was still bound to her, even as he began life anew. And so long as he remained subject to the curse, so did the soul of the girl who meant so much to him. Next, the witch went to visit the swordsman. His soul was imprisoned in the cellar from which the stench of blood and flesh emanated. After losing his mind, the twisted killer began destroying everything in sight while howling in some incomprehensible tongue, perhaps his native language, perhaps not in a human language at all. The witch was, in truth, not looking forward to this visit. While the cursed mansion was indeed her domain, her own little realm of the dead, she was still just a regular soul herself. If he were to catch her off guard, he could very well damage her soul beyond repair. The witch held the greatest grudge against the barbaric lord, but she remained the most cautious around the swordsman. With an exasperated sigh, she opened the cellar door. And, exactly as she expected, a barely humanoid beast leapt at her the second she did. Stop this instant, she shouted, pointing a bony finger at the beast. In the realm of the dead, it was willpower, not physical strength that ruled. Which meant that while the witch had been a helpless girl in life, she was the most powerful being in this domain. At her command, the beast froze mid-motion, a katana held high above his head. He stared wide-eyed at the small girl standing before him, beads of sweat forming on his neck. The beast shouted something in some inhuman tongue. The witch glanced around the cellar. It was littered with corpses, bloodstains on every surface. Perhaps among the bodies was even the woman he called his tether. The witch turned her golden eyes back to the beast. In life, she had been terrified of this man, so scared that she had resorted to opening her door for the flaxen-haired boy, hoping to ask for his assistance. But now, there was no fear. Only glee at having him entirely under her thumb. How would you like it if I returned you to the realm of the living? She asked with a devilish grin. The beast stared at her blankly, his form shifting to something faintly more human. You're still torn between your two greatest desires, aren't you? You thirst for blood, and yet you crave a quiet life at the same time. You've already fallen once, lived as a beast, but that wasn't enough to satisfy you. So perhaps the only way to quench your thirst is with the other desire, peace and quiet. And I'm offering you another chance to have that. Do you mean it? The shadow's hands were trembling. It took the witch everything in her power to not start cackling at the sight. That abhorrent killer shaking like a lamb. Yes, I mean it, she said with a smile. The katana fell from the beast's hands, letting out a loud, high-pitched clang when it hit the hard floor. As the sound echoed in the cellar, it sounded almost like 1,000 ghosts screaming. So you do want to go back to being a man after all. The shadow dropped his head in a crude imitation of a nod. A hideous beast and his most benevolent savior, it was a scene that could have easily taken place between him and the white-haired girl in his second life. Of course, the witch's intentions were nothing like hers. And by the witch's mercy, the beast was freed. With his disappearance, the countless bodies stacked up in the cellar vanished as if they had never been there. Only the smell of blood remained to remind her of the carnage. The witch then burst out laughing, unable to hold it back any longer. Oh, that was brilliant. Do you really think you'll ever be able to find peace? No, you'll just kill whoever holds you back and descend to madness, no matter how much you resist. And this time, you're going to turn everyone on you and die as a sad, miserable, gruesome death. Her cackling echoed in the cold cellar for some time. Her final stop was to see the man she despised more than anyone, the Lord, that monstrous savage. The mere thought of him filling her head with a pitch-black rage. He had ruined her life and tainted her soul. He was the cruelest, most barbaric of all of them. He held disgusting blood Sabbaths, turning a saint into a spectacle. The witch despised all three men, but her loathing for the Lord, the ultimate root of her suffering, was far, far greater than the other two. She made her way to the den on the second floor. Cigarette smoke seeped out into the hallway, a smell as sad as the man waiting inside. When she opened the door, a cloud of smoke escaped, and only then was she able to see inside. Sitting on the edge of the billiards table with his head drooped was the third shadow, again barely able to maintain a human form. A few seconds later, he noticed the witch's presence and stumbled off the table, shuffling precariously towards her. He extended a hand for her in grief and overwhelming regret, but the witch only saw it as a threat. He was trying to hurt her, as he had done so many times in life, to save himself. "Don't you dare touch me," she said, causing his hand to freeze in the air. It formed the chasm between them, boundlessly wide and unfathomably deep. One he would never be able to cross. "Rejoice, Lord," the witch said with a devilish grin. "I'm setting your soul free." The shadow just stood there, staring at her. He didn't rejoice at the news, and in fact seemed to be rather upset by it. He opened his mouth to try to say something, but only strained gasps escaped from his lips. The witch tilted her head. The other two had been thrilled to hear they were being set free, so she was not expecting this reaction. "Ah," she said with a nod. "I see what it is. You realize that was a trick, and that I'm really sending you out to your third doom. I suppose being the Lord for so long, you would need a sense of danger." The man was desperately trying to communicate something to her, but with each attempt to use his voice, it only got less and less comprehensible. If he couldn't speak, then he would have to try something else. So he dragged his legs forward, toward the witch. "You will never lay another finger on me," she commanded, pointing a skeletal finger at the shadow's feet. Heavy black chains, strongly reminiscent of doors that had been used to seal the observation tower's door, appeared from the floor and wrapped themselves around his ankles, digging deep into his skin. The shadow fell to his knees, and the sound of rattling metal echoed in the den. Heh heh. Oh, what a sorry sight. The former lord of a large territory and the head of a mafia family on his hands and knees, utterly helpless. How does it feel being looked down on by a mere commoner? It must be absolutely humiliating. The shadow screamed, still mostly indecipherable. But more so than before, his intense desire to get through to her was beginning to show an effect. The witch cackled, glaring down at the pathetic creature before her. She knew how prideful a man he was. He was undoubtedly trying to assail her with curses and promises of vengeance. And oh, how delightful it would be to completely break him. "Go on, my dear. Tell me how much you despise me. Take it nice and slow. You can do it." She crouched before the shadow, peering into his eyes. He didn't have a face to read an expression from, but she could still feel the desperation. He groaned and grunted until finally he was able to form words. "I want to make amends." The witch froze. It took her several seconds to comprehend what he had just said. Had he just asked to make amends? The Lord? The man who had held those dreadful blood Sabbaths, tortured slaves for fun, and was concerned only about satisfying his own desires? Wanted to atone? For what purpose? "I made you into the witch. I will do anything you want. I want to make amends." "Shut up." The witch stepped back away from the Lord. She was rattled, and her face contorted in confusion, luckily hidden by her hood. Right, this was just a ploy to escape from her curse. He was offering atonement in the hope that she would show him mercy. Well, he was a fool. She had no mercy to spare. The only thing she had in her heart was boundless hatred. Having regained her composure, the witch decided she would make him pay for attempting to worm his way free with an empty show of grace. She turned her gaze toward the shadow-cloaked ceiling and made a wish. In her mind, she envisioned the long sword the Lord had held above her head, and a few moments later, that very blade descended from the void. The time-worn sword rattled to the floor beside the Lord. Raising her fleshless arm, the witch pointed at the blade with a smirk. "If you wish to atone for what you've done, you will have to suffer the same pain as I did. Take the blade, and with it sever your own left arm." And should you refuse, that proves you're a heartless tyrant only capable of hurting others, she meant to say, but couldn't finish. What? The sound spilled unbidden from her lips as a massive shadow made a thump against the dense carpet. Jet black liquid spurted from his left shoulder, staining the area around him. He hadn't even hesitated. What next? The shadow plunged the bloody sword into the ground, leaning against the hilt for support. He was breathing heavily from the pain, but still he asked for more, knowing a single arm didn't compare to the agony she had been made to endure. It goes to show you, Jacopo really loved her. He just had a very sad fate, and an unfortunate circumstance of becoming the Lord. The witch stared at him flabbergasted. What on earth was happening? Was this the kind of man the Lord was? No, forget that. Regardless of whatever he was doing now, he had still locked her in the observation tower and killed her. He was a brutal, savage murderer, and nothing changed that. He had to be. He had to be. What do you want me to do next? What will bring you relief? Morgana. Silence. The witch's mind was a mess. Something seemed wrong, but her soul refused to let her see what. Pain that she had long since buried was drifting back to the surface. As anger and hatred bubbled furiously in her gut, she twisted her lips into a smile and proclaimed, "Very well then, as you wish, I'll let you experience the full extent of the pain and helplessness I was made to suffer." And so, she put the Lord through all the pain, suffering, and despair she had gone through in life, covering his body in wounds from head to toe and draping the den in a thick layer of black blood. It was the witch's very own blood Sabbath. The black shadow lay in the twisted mound in the center of the sea of blood, occasional strained gurgles, and the only sign anything remained inside. He had endured the entirety of her 16 years of life in the tiniest fraction of that time, and as a result, his soul was on the brink of disappearance. The witch was breathing heavily as well. In the process of administering his punishment, she had to relive it all as well, creating brand new wounds on her soul. This is really sad, guys, because at the end of the day, she doesn't know that's Jacopo. And Jacopo knew what he did to her, knew how much suffering she went through, and he's trying to atone for it. And they're both suffering, and it's just, wow, depressing. It had been centuries since she had last been hurt by her past. That's enough, she said. I'm sending your soul back out into the world so you can begin your third life, and your third tragedy. I will never let your suffering end. Coughing up blood, the shadow lifted his head, shaking it weakly. Didn't object to the suffering, only doing it in the mortal realm. It had to be here, with her, where she could see it. He had so much he wanted to say, but only the strength left in his lips to put one sentiment into words. That he wanted to atone, of course. That was the only thing he truly desired. The witch bit her lip. These incomprehensible feelings he kept dragging out of her were driving her mad, and the very fact that she was unable to retain her composure was only a source of further agitation. Are you incapable of saying anything else? If you're capable of feeling remorse, why would you do any of that to me in the first place? Why did you hold all those blood Sabbaths? Why did you make a spectacle out of me? Why did you torture your slaves for fun? Why did you call me a witch? Why did you lock me up and murder me? He likely wanted to tell her she was wrong, but because not everything she had said was false, he couldn't. And he didn't have the strength or the clarity of mind to explain it in detail. So all he could do was cling to his self-destructive wish for atonement. I will never be able to understand you, Lord. The witch's mental state was beginning to shift again. Not for the better, though. The only person capable of untangling this massive knot that had formed was no longer around, which meant it would only continue to get more and more tangled. And she was starting to think she'd rather be rid of him entirely than have him suffer for all eternity. The longer she kept him around, the more chances he would have to beg to make amends. But she was done with that. She was done with the Lord's nonsense. And she was done with feeling like such a mess because of him. Okay then, as you wish. This wasn't part of my plan, but I'll let you have your final atonement. As she spoke, she bent down and picked up the sword with her skeletal hand. By giving me your head. He didn't object, and he didn't try to run. Instead, he pushed himself up with his right arm, dropping his head and exposing his neck for her. Morgana looked down on him with disgust. She tightened her grip on the sword, pretending not to notice the faint trembling in her hand. Farewell, Lord. May your soul be forever extinguished from this world. With those words, she ended the Lord's life once and for all. And with his death, the truth scattered into the wind. Morgana's robe was heavy with black blood. She was exhausted. She thought having her revenge would take a huge weight off her shoulders, but instead she just felt lethargic. She wanted to get back to the warmth of the fireplace and go down for another nice long sleep. But when she opened the door to the hallway, "Have you finished your business?" She came face to face with the maid, her jade eyes glimmering unnaturally. Morgana took a half step back. What was she getting spooked for? She was the most powerful being in this domain. She was in complete control. The witch gave a low to mask her momentary stumble, then said, "Yes, I've finished. Now tell me, is the fireplace going? I'm rather tired and would like to rest." "But of course, Morgana. I put fresh kindling on the fire not long ago. It should be nice and warm for your nap." "Very well." Morgana lowered her gaze and made to leave the maid behind. But then she realized something seemed very wrong. How does the maid know my name? A chill ran down her back. If the maid's mind was still broken, she would never call Morgana by that name, because she believed it to be her own. Cold jade eyes remained fixed on Golden. A smile spread across the maid's lips. The witch could not, though. "Are you Giselle? If so, why? Why would you pretend to be mad if she still retained herself? What was her objective? Why was she wearing that unsettling smile if she was Giselle? Who on earth was she?" For the first time, she felt something like fear for the maid, for Giselle. She was the witch, though. She was supposed to be the one everyone else feared. She was the master of the house. She was the most powerful being in this tiny domain. So why did she feel like Giselle of all people had taken the upper hand? She had to have been imagining it. Giselle was her faithful maid, and she was the all-powerful witch. However, that dynamic only existed as it did because Giselle had Michel to wait for, her one source of hope, and her weakness. But now that he was gone and Giselle no longer had any hope, would she really stay in Morgana's servitude for eternity? "While you were asleep, I spent some time organizing my thoughts." "Is that so?" the witch said. "It is. After Hayden's death, you told me of the three men who wronged you, and of your enmity for them." "That may have happened, yes. And then you told me how you made a wish for them, a wish that they would undergo reconstruction and meet their tragic demises again." "Yes, what of it? Something about it doesn't quite sit right with me." "I've only heard the events from your perspective, though, so I can only speculate on what it means. But a story told from one perspective is necessarily colored by that perspective. If the speaker believes something, it becomes true within the telling, regardless of the reality of it. I'm quite familiar with this phenomenon, as I have fallen into its trap before." "What are you implying? Are you trying to say I'm wrong about what happened to me?" "I cannot say, and the only one who could is no longer with us. Any chance we had of knowing the truth is now lost forever. However, unlike you, I was there with all three of them for their second lives, and in particular, my impression of the man in the third door, who you refer to as the Lord, does not line up with your depiction of him in certain ways." "Would you really call him a heartless monster?" "Why wouldn't I?" the witch said. "He passed goblets of my blood around to noblemen like wine. Does that sound like someone who has a heart?" Giselle didn't back down in the face of Morgana's intense glare. In fact, she took another step closer. Morgana was starting to feel like she was at a disadvantage, despite full confidence she was right. "And what if you were mistaken about some fundamental detail?" "Mistaken? No, there was nothing to mistake. The Lord was a monster. He was the one when he drained her blood for feast, and he was when he locked her in the tower. That was the simple truth of it. Why then did she feel like her chest was in a vice every time she told herself that? Why had her hand shaken before killing him? And why on earth did her mind keep imagining him begging to atone as someone completely unrelated? For a heartbeat, a vision of that lonely graveyard swelled up in her mind. Standing there was the slave man, whose name and face and voice she had long forgotten, the one who had taught her kindness. "I chose not to stop you, though," Giselle said. "And why do you think I did that?" "Enough games. Out with it already. What are you scheming?" "Oh, I would never. I simply wanted one thing. For you to lose everything as well." Whoa. Now that was unexpected. I would never think Giselle would do that. Like, that's not in her character. But then again, this girl broke her too, so. The witch glowered at Giselle, who was still wearing the same lonely smile. She had no idea what that inscrutable woman was trying to say. She had already lost everything. That was what had driven her to become the spiteful witch in the first place, drifting outside of time for all eternity. Giselle placed a hand on the witch's cheek. Jade and golden eyes locked mere inches apart. And there, the witch gazed into the eyes of another witch. "You surrendered yourself to hatred, becoming a witch who brandishes curses. And I surrendered myself to solitude, becoming a witch who brandishes desolation." Oh, so she became a witch. This is a world too painful to live in if you don't love solitude after all. No, there's only one witch, me. And why might you think that? Because I'm the one who started it all. I'm the one who created this mansion and I am its master. I bear more hatred than anyone. I'm the one. As departed souls were formed by our will and our emotions. How do you know my despair, sorrow, and solitude aren't stronger than the hatred that makes you? And then, with an unsettling cold smile that radiated pure emptiness, the smile of the true witch, she offered the girl one final thought. Can you be certain the lord you killed was the same lord? And with those words, that tiny, insignificant realm became devoid of even pain. Wow. Okay, you know what? I really do like these short stories, even if they're not necessarily canon or if they are canon. They're interesting takes. But I gotta end the video here for today, guys. So thank you all for watching. We'll continue on to Defectives and Boy Meets Girl in the next one. So thank you again.